From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, along with Jeff Wickman. Coming up today, from Oklahoma State University, Deryl Waldren provides this week's cattle market segment. He'll discuss why you cattle producers ought to be flexible in your marketing management, given the uncertainty over several market factors currently. Then K-State's Krishna Jagadish will discuss his current research on the effect of nighttime temperatures on the yield and quality of a wheat crop, growing more than 300 cultivars of wheat in heat-controlled tents. It's a project unique to the world, Krishna tells us. And later on this week's 4-H segment, K-State's Deryl Waldren will preview this year's Kansas 4-H State Wheat Expo. All that and more right here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're listening to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. Up first, our weekly look at the activity taking place in the livestock market. Here to provide this week's commentary and analysis is Oklahoma State University livestock economist Deryl Waldren. Deryl, there are new crop production numbers out, and that's indicating some high feed prices?
That's right. You know, the cattle market situation is changed, significantly in the last month or so, and it's largely driven by what's going on the crop side. So we've got the latest corn and soybean planting progress on record, and at this point it's very clear that we're going to plant less acres, have lower yields. We're going to have a smaller crop. We don't yet know how small it will be, but inevitably it means that we're going to see some higher feed prices, and that's beginning to weigh on these feeder cattle markets.
Any strategies that they can incorporate now, or is this still going to be kind of a wait-and-see situation?
Well, certainly we're going to want to monitor it closely because it is still a very much an unknown at this point. You know, obviously feedlots, I think, probably are looking at maybe locking in some feed prices at this point. We've already had some run up, but there's still risk of some higher prices yet, so that's one consideration. Cow-calf producers probably don't change things a great deal at this point, but you monitor it. The one thing that may come into this, higher feed prices generally puts a higher value on gain at the stocker level, and so that could be stocker producers buying those calves with a better value of gain as feedlots make adjustments to try to avoid some of those high feed costs. It may, for cow-calf producers, also translate into a potential for retaining ownership beyond weaning this fall. It's at least something that you want to keep in mind and certainly pencil out as the time gets closer.
Overall, though, beef demand seems to be struggling somewhat.
Well, it may be. You know, for the last 2 years, in 2017 and 2018, we described those years in general terms as sort of a pleasant surprise. And that pleasant surprise was largely driven by the fact that demand was really better than expected to some extent, both domestic and international components. Now we're seeing some things that may suggest that we're going to lose a little bit of that luster here. It's not clear, but we certainly want to keep an eye on it. So domestic demand may be struggling a little bit, although the most recent retail prices that we got would suggest we've not seen any weakness there that was for the month of May. So we watched that. On the international side, of course, we've got 4 months of trade data in now for 2019, and so far this year, beef exports are down, beef imports are up slightly. So that's going to move us a little bit away from some of the support that we've been getting from those international markets.
The international markets are not as hot as they used to be?
Well, again, there's a lot of dynamics at work. Obviously, in a bigger sense, we've got all of this trade war stuff, tariff situations. And so it's kind of hard to sort out, sort of what the big picture is there, as well as specifically how it applies to the U.S. You know, some of it could be related to a stronger dollar, at least in some markets or against some currencies. The dollar is a little bit stronger, so that makes a bit of a headwind for some of the exports. there's just a variety of factors. Again, it's not clear that there's a trend here. And in fact, I don't think we've changed our forecast that we expect exports to be flat to maybe slightly higher for the year. But the early part of the year says we need to keep a close eye on it.
And in terms of the supply side, how does that look?
Well, all of this is happening against the backdrop of basically record large beef production. We've been expanding beef production for the last 4 years. We've held it kind of in check this year. Carcass weights have been lower than expected. Weather had a big impact on that. Slaughter right now is just about flat with last year, but overall, again, on an annual basis, we think slaughter will be up slightly. Carcass weights will probably be flat to, unchanged plus or minus. So we'll see at least some increase in total beef production for the year. So we've got lots of meat going through the system, and we've got lots of pork and poultry in addition to that. So there's plenty of meat supplies to challenge this market.
And what should we expect for the summer markets? Because that's usually a good time, at least domestically.
Well, again, there's a lot of issues out there right now. Beef markets, we're trying to get into grilling season. I think one of the demand concerns thus far this year has been the fact that we've had a lot of cooler and wetter weather than usual, and we really haven't seen that summer grilling demand kick in really strong. We had a nice run-up in boxed beef prices prior to Memorial Day, but it couldn't hold simply because the weather's just been okay. It hasn't been really bad, but it hasn't been stellar as well. So as we approach the 4th of July here, we'll be looking for warmer weather and maybe see that summer demand kick in. One of the issues out there right now is on the pork side. The pork industry has got tremendous supplies, lots of challenges in the domestic market. But, we've got this situation in China with African swine fever and an expectation that China will be looking to purchase not only more pork from lots of places around the world, but probably most other meats as well. They'll be looking for more poultry and more beef, and that may help support the entire protein complex. It hasn't really kicked in for sure yet, but in the second half of the year, we'll be looking more for that.
In terms of what cattle producers might be thinking about, what are some marketing strategies?
Well, again, we're talking about a lot of uncertainty right now, a lot of dynamics in the market. We've enjoyed relatively stable markets for about 2 years, and I think we're now back into a little more volatile situation. So one of the things is just keep an eye on things. In the very short run, when we've got lots of trade issues that are being bandied around on a week-to-week basis, that does have impacts on markets. So I think one thing that producers need to do is just try to stay as light on their feet as they can. The more nimble you can be, just in the very short run, changing things by a week or two relative to whatever comes out in the headlines can be an important strategy. Beyond that, again, I mentioned some considerations for, potentially a little bit of improvement in stalker-type signals or retained ownership signals. That's something to check out. I don't think any of this that we're talking about at this point in time suggests a major change in the overall direction of the industry. We're sort of plateauing in numbers here cyclically. I don't think any of this yet suggests that we're going to change that into a liquidation mode or anything like that. It could happen, and so we just have to watch it going forward.
Are there any signs we can look for in the international markets, though? Are there any new markets that could open up?
There are, we're always working on a number of markets. We have seen some increased access, for example, with beef in a number of these smaller markets around the world. Most recently, there was an announcement that the EU has changed their quota system that will basically, in such a way that it will give the U.S. a little more sort of guaranteed access, if you will, to that. It's not a big number, but these things all add up. And again, there's a lot of flux going on right now with all of these issues. So there will certainly be opportunities for some growth in some other markets. Obviously, if we could get some trade things finalized and settle down, then the potential would be even higher.
How much uncertainty does that cause within the market?
Well, I think it causes a lot of uncertainty, and I guess we had a really good example here just in the last couple of weeks when, President Trump announced a threat to put tariffs on all Mexican imports. Markets reacted very negatively to that, very dramatically in a short run. And then, 10 days later or whatever it was, that threat went away and the markets sort of bounced back. And, those interim losses never come back, but the market responds both negatively and positively, and it just creates that kind of volatility that we're, going to deal with right now.
And I think, as you were mentioning, one of the keys is to make sure that producers are using those best management practices.
If you can be as flexible as you can. I mean, as you know, cattle production implies at some point in time you got to move, you've got to do something. But to the extent that you have the ability to maintain some flexibility in the very short run, a week or 2 or 3 weeks, given the kind of volatility we were just talking about, can be pretty important for producers. So it's always something to keep in mind, and obviously we just have to monitor current events on a day-to-day basis.
Any idea what we may see in the markets in the next few weeks or so?
Well, we're trying to figure out on the beef side. Again, we're trying to get a beat on this summer weather, summer grilling demand, if you will. Box beef did drop pretty hard after the April run-up, but it's kind of stabilized since then. If we have a good 4th of July, we'll probably see that again, at least hold steady through the dog days of summer after we get into the really hot days of late July and August. So if that stabilizes, fed cattle are trying to hold on to where they are. Seasonally, we typically drift a little bbit lower here through the summer until about Labor Day, and then we'll see some pickup in that. And I think we're on track to hold that at this point in time, although there's a very negative picture right now in the futures market for both live cattle and feeder cattle. So feeder cattle, the big feeder cattle, typically actually seasonally move higher through the summer and peak in about July or August. We're not doing that right now. We've had a fairly significant weakness in that market, but I think it'll stabilize, and we may pick back up on that seasonal pattern as we go through the next few weeks. All
right, Deryl, as always, we thank you for the update.
You are very welcome.
That's Oklahoma State University livestock economist Deryl Peel with this week's analysis of the activity taking place in the markets. And this reminder to listen to the podcast version of Agriculture Today, visit agtoday.net, agtoday.net, or using an app on your mobile device, type these search keywords, Agriculture, Today, Kansas, and you'll find this program. By tapping the subscribe button, brand new episodes of Agriculture Today will automatically arrive on your device. That's agtoday.net. Agriculture Today is back after the break. This is the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
This is Agriculture Today. Kansas State University researchers are growing more than 300 cultivars of wheat in 6 heat-controlled tents to test the effect of nighttime temperatures on the yield and quality of the crop. The tests are in response to anticipated increases in soil temperatures in the coming years. K-State crop physiologist and associate professor of agronomy Krishna Jagadish says there is no facility like this in the world. Krishna, give us some background on how this project came about.
So this basically goes back to my previous job, what I was doing in rice in the Philippines, where high nighttime temperatures had a significant impact on the yield as well as quality on rice. So after joining K-State, I realized that winter wheat is equally as sensitive to rice, and then got in touch with a few collaborators in University of Nebraska-Lincoln and Arkansas State, and convinced them that this is really happening to both rice and wheat, and that's how we got together on putting this project together.
And this is really the first time anybody has done this.
They have done similar things using small grow chambers, but never has it been done on the scale that we are doing on the field conditions, which it really matters. So I can confidently say that there's nobody who has done this on the field conditions using such a large number of cultivars.
Let's talk about the large scale, because you're looking at about 320 varieties of wheat, and you also have 6 large tents set up.
Right. So the whole beauty of the system is you can actually control the nighttime temperatures on the field conditions, which is very realistic. And then we have 320 different cultivars of winter wheat, where basically this could either be grown in the U.S. or some of the derivatives which have come out of it, which are currently being grown. We have 6 tents, 3 of them for controls and 3 of them for high nighttime temperature, so as to control the temperature and to compare what happens under a control situation or when the nighttime temperatures starts to get more warmer.
In terms of the nighttime temperatures then, how high are you going with those nighttime temperatures?
We are trying to follow what the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change predictions are, to be as close to that, pretty much going by about 3.5 to 4 degrees centigrade above the normal temperatures that is outside. The way the tents have been set up is there are multiple sensors inside the control tents, which actually reads the temperatures within the control tents, feeds it back into a Raspberry Pi, which is a cyber-physical system technology, and that allows wirelessly transmitting the average temperature onto the heated tents, where the heaters, which is run through a generators, will then kick the generators on, and then you have the heating system going on. So it's all wirelessly controlled.
And are all 3 of the non-controlled tents then, are they set at various degrees, or are you doing everything at the same nighttime temperature?
That's a very good question. We had a similar sort of a project done on a smaller scale in the growth chamber conditions, but now on the field condition, it's kind of hard to do so many multiple tents because these are huge. It costs a lot of investment. But based on a previous experience of seeing that between 3 and 4 degrees centigrade is the most appropriate temperature to be testing such a large number of cultivars, we have fixed with one temperature.
Tell me just how big these tents are so that people can kind of visualize the size of this.
Oh, these are 30 by 48 feet, quite large.
And you've spaced everything an equal distance apart?
Yes, the way we actually designed these tents was to make sure that they don't actually overlap, not only in terms of coming in way of each other's, but also the shadow, because you start to see the sun going from the east to west, and you don't want the shadow to be actually falling on the plants which are growing in the next tent. So we have spaced them out in a zigzag manner, giving them sufficient space so that the shadow doesn't interfere with the plants growing in a neighboring tent. So the whole operation of how this actually happens, during the day, these tents are semi-automatedly controlled, so they actually roll completely up both on the sides as well as on the end walls and even on the top. So all these cultivars which are grown under these tents experience the same set of conditions during the day, same light, same wind speed, same radiation. So they're all actually growing at the same pace, but then come night, these get covered down, and then the control temperatures are still at the optimum what you would consider for a wheat growing condition, but with the heat tents, they get this high nighttime temperature. So you can actually compare on a very realistically field condition what's exactly happening to your wheat cultivars if your nighttime temperature starts to warm up.
How long has the project been underway?
It started off last year where we had a small prototype going, but this is the first year which we are dealing with such a large scale, and we hope to continue this for at least another year or two, and then hopefully use the tents to introduce similar sort of stresses on other crops that are of importance to Kansas or elsewhere in the U.S.
It sounds as though you're getting real-time data, so you're able to crunch some numbers along the way or not?
We are getting every minute temperature data pretty much, so you can imagine the amount of data that's coming out. So we have Dan Wagner, who is a graduate student from computer science, helping out with the cyber physical systems, where every day he actually downloads this tons of data coming out from both for control and the high nighttime temperatures. So we are able to compare on a daily basis if the whole system is working okay or does it need any tweaks or not. So fingers crossed, till now things have been going in the right direction.
Are you learning anything yet? I'm sure you haven't reached any conclusions, but what are you seeing so far?
The very simple thing that you start to see is the majority of these cultivars that are grown in the high nighttime temperature tents, they start to mature a bit earlier. So you start to see them becoming golden yellow in the high night temperature tents. They tend to become mature much earlier. This is the very first indication that you start to know when temperatures during the night go higher. So it's a visual observation as of now, but we are taking plenty of other data to come to a solid conclusion. But I think it would take another this year as well as a subsequent year experimentation to come to a real conclusion.
And what's the benefit? Why do the study? What is this going to tell us? How is this going to help us?
It is going to, if you really like your bread or, in fact, your beer, and I think it's going to impact both of them quite significantly. The one thing you want to notice is when you are actually walking in the streets during the day, you do really feel it is hot, right? But when you go back home and during the night, you have your AC and you're sleeping well, you don't really realize how hot it is getting, but the wheat which is actually on the ground really is feeling the heat. So recently, indications have shown that the nighttime temperatures are warming and the trend is going to go on like that into the future. So what does that actually means to some of the public, right? With these nighttime temperatures going higher, there is a demand for additional carbon to be burnt from a plant, so which otherwise would have ended up into your wheat grain. But because of this additional cost, the starch content in your grain starts to go down and then gives the opportunity to the plants to store more protein. So you're going to get a grain which has lesser starch and higher protein. So that actually affects your bread quality, because a very high protein content can start to crust your bread quite a lot. So then if you are a person who doesn't like your bread to be crusty enough, then I think that's going to be one dimension where your bread quality could be affected.
You mentioned beer too.
Right. So in terms of the brewing industry, there are some very specific regulations, and I think this actually goes not just to wheat, but also to barley as well. As I was hearing to some of the breeders speak, they generally like grains to be plumpy, and they have a certain window where they have to germinate. They have a very small window for germination, and also they need quite a high level of starch in their grains for good brewing. And all these things are going to be negatively affected with warming nighttime temperatures. Your grains are going to become less plumpier, and the duration that it actually takes for them to germinate or to malt in the beering industry is going to become much longer, and the starch content is going to go down. So it's just not that you will have less amount of beer with the lower production, but your quality of beer might not taste as it is tasting today.
So that'll get people's attention.
I hope so. It does, and I think it is quite serious because without us knowing, things are happening during the night. So I think we really need to take into consideration that one and move forward. And the whole idea behind this project is to work with breeders in a way that because we have these 320 different cultivars or genetic resource, so what happens is some of these lines can still maintain these nighttime temperatures and not have an impact on the yield and the quality. So our whole effort is to try and identify such lines and then bring it into the breeding efforts at KSU. So basically we then develop our wheat which are able to sustain even if the night temperatures get to warm up in the future. So that's the overall objective of the project.
Interesting project, and we will have you back in another 6 months to a year to find out how things are going.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I would be really happy because I just gave you a visual observation of what we see right now, but a year down the line, we should be able to tell you something in more concrete if we really found out something which is really interesting and ways of how we can actually save our bread and beer for the future.
That's K-State crop physiologist and Associate Professor of Agronomy Krishna Jagadish. He says the work is funded for 2 more years by the National Science Foundation through its established program to stimulate competitive research program. As Krishna mentioned, K-State is working on the study in partnership with the University of Nebraska and Arkansas State University, which is currently looking to build its own heat tents. Agriculture Today is back after the break. This is the K-State Radio Network.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
You're listening to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and with today's agricultural news headlines for you now, courtesy in part of DTN. Senator Debbie Stabenow of Michigan remains skeptical that the Commodity Credit Corporation has enough funding for the initial Market Facilitation Program 2 payments. She expressed that view during a Senate Agriculture Committee hearing last week. CCC funds will replenish later this year as the fiscal year 2020 appropriations funding process is expected to provide sufficient leeway for the USDA to execute the $16 billion MFP2 package. Still, Stabenow questioned whether the USDA can come up with the $16 billion. She said the USDA only has about $7.7 billion in additional spending authority through its CCC account. USDA Chief Economist Rob Johansson said there should be no problem because the CCC's $30 billion in annual spending authority will be replenished at the start of the fiscal year, which begins on October the 1st. Tentative plans are for the Trump administration to release around 50% or $8 billion of the MFP2 plan in August, another 25% or $4 billion in December, and the last 25%, $4 billion again in February. The second and third installments would be contingent on ongoing trade policy discussions, according to USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue. Selection of the Kansas City region to serve as the new home for the Economic Research Service and the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, or NIFA, was announced last week, as you know, by Secretary Perdue. Promised cost-benefit analysis was also released by the USDA. It showed savings from the move of $300 million over a 15-year lease term, or roughly $20 million per year. Besides the savings, Secretary Perdue cited the region's strong ties to the agricultural sector, the proximity to multiple land-grant universities, and a robust labor talent pool as key factors that drove the USDA's decision. Now, state and local governments in the Kansas City area also offered generous relocation incentives packages totaling more than $26 million, according to Perdue, though he declined to elaborate on the details of those incentives as he talked with reporters after the announcement. Ultimately, the fate of the relocations is in Congress' hands. Many lawmakers, especially Democrats, remain skeptical or even hostile to the proposal. Already, Congress has included provisions in fiscal year 19 spending plan seeking a pause on the effort, and a similar provision is currently included in the fiscal year 20 USDA appropriations bill making its way through the House. Meantime, the USDA has dropped the plans to realign the Economic Research Service under the agency's chief economist. More on that from the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
The decision to relocate two USDA research agencies to the Kansas City region is moving ahead, while a realignment plan for one of the agencies, the Economic Research Service, is not.
In August, USDA announced the realignment of ERS under the Office of the Chief Economist. While we believe there are considerable synergies and benefits to realignment, after hearing feedback from stakeholders and members of Congress, USDA does not have plans to move forward with the realignment.
That was Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue.
ERS will remain under the Research, Education, and Economics mission area.
The other agency that is set to relocate is the National Institute of Food and Agriculture.
My goal as Secretary of Agriculture is and has been to make USDA the most effective, the most efficient, and customer-focused department in the entire federal government. And that means being more responsive to the people outside of Washington, D.C.
This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Beginning today, dairy producers can begin signing up for the new Dairy Margin Coverage Farm Bill program at the local Farm Service Agency offices. More on that from the USDA's Rod Bain.
Dairy producers starting this coming Monday can go into their local Farm Service Agency office and sign up for the new Dairy Margin Coverage Safety Net program.
We've worked really diligently to make sure that the Dairy Margin Coverage program was the first program under the 2018 Farm Bill that we were able to roll out.
Due to demand and need for dairy growers for consistent coverage, according to FSA Administrator Richard Fordyce. Among the changes in dairy margin coverage from its predecessor,
two of the major components of the change are an addition addition to the benefits, so the margin coverages are higher and premiums are lower.
Plus, coverage is retroactive under dairy margin coverage to January 1st of this year, with applicable payments following soon after enrollment. There's also an online decision support tool available to assist dairy farmers. More details about DMC and the online decision support tool are available at the Dairy Margin Coverage webpage at www.farmers.gov. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And, of course, interested participants can inquire more about that program at the local FSA counter likewise. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and now it's on to our weekly feature from the Kansas Forest Service here at Kansas State University, Tree Tales, this time with K-State forester Charlie Barden. Charlie?
Some people think that tree pruning should only be done in late winter or early spring, which is true if you're trying to encourage new growth on young trees or the annual pruning done on producing fruit trees. However, many older shade trees in their home landscape are large enough, and an early summer pruning will help reduce their crown size. As branches get heavier with new foliage, they may be dragging against the shingles of your house or hanging low and getting in the way of mowing your lawn or blocking the view at the end of your driveway. I like to give a light pruning to a young elm tree in my yard each June. It provides wonderful shade to our deck all summer. When the branches blow in the wind, they can scrape against the house. Thus, the reasons to conduct summer pruning are to reduce the size or slow the growth of a tree, or to remove branches that have just become troublesome. Some advantages to pruning in early summer are that the wounds begin to heal over very quickly at this time of year, because the cambium is actively growing. Also, if you've been concerned in the past with bleeding or excess sap flow that comes from maples and some other trees when pruning in early spring, by simply delaying pruning till the leaves are fully expanded in June, the wound will not bleed. This is especially helpful if the branches hang over a patio area or do not want sap dripping onto outdoor furniture. If you have smaller trees to prune, say just remove a few lower branches, a pair of lopping shears or a small handsaw will do the job well. In most cases, it is best to remove a branch entirely back to the trunk instead of cutting it off halfway out. When removing the entire branch, it is important to cut it off just outside the branch collar. This will result in a nearly circular wound but not leave a stub sticking out. The tree will grow over this wound in a couple of years, depending on the diameter of the tree and the removed branch. You've been listening to Tree Tales. I'm Charles Barden, a forester with K-State Research and Extension.
Many thanks, Charlie, as always. Well, next up, this week's 4-H segment, we'll hand it back over to Jeff Wickman and his guest as they will preview that major event for 4-H youth aligned with our wheat industry in the state. More on that next, here on the K-State Radio Network.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. I'm Jeff Wickman. Well, if asked, a lot of people would probably say that they associate Kansas with things like the Wizard of Oz, tornadoes, and, of course, wheat. And for decades, Kansas 4-H has been offering families a chance to participate in an educational experience that's built exclusively around wheat, from cleaning it to baking with it. This year's Kansas 4-H State Wheat Expo is being held August 8th at the Kingman Expo Center in Kingman. Northwest Area 4-H Specialist Deryl Waldren joins us now to provide an overview of the activities that are being featured at this year's annual event. Deryl, this is one of those programs that may be one of the longest-running 4-H programs, 65-plus years.
It is. Kansas 4-H Wheat Expo began, I believe, in 1954. In the early days, there were quite a few of them around the state. For the last few years, we've just had one statewide event, the Wheat Expo, and this year it's going to be in Kingman, Kansas on August 8th.
And the idea here is just an educational wheat fun day?
It is. It's kind of all things wheat centered around the primary focus of Kansas for agriculture is the wheat state, and so we've got a fun day for the whole family, which would be parents, kids, grandparents, extension staff, FFA staff, anybody who's interested in learning about all things wheat. And we've got a kind of 6 hours fully packed with tours, educational ideas and experiences, as well as some nice door prizes that we give away, as well as some judging of exhibits.
We'll talk a little bit about that. There's 9 different divisions.
There is. There are 8, and then we have a Clover Buds division, which would be non-competitive. And the 8 divisions, the first 2 are actually sending in a sample of wheat. And the first division would be for those that are in the Crops Project, and they would be sent to Manhattan for testing by July 22nd. And then the interesting one that anybody can do is called Adopt a Producer, and you could work with a neighbor or a friend and send in a sample of their wheat and, learn about the wheat, harvesting of wheat, and it gets tested at K-State labs for milling qualities and protein and a lot of other factors, and there are prizes on that. Those have to be done earlier, as I said, submitted to Manhattan by July 22nd. The other divisions that are available, the exhibits are brought that day, and we have a 1-quart jar of cleaned wheat. Another one would be 3 yeast rolls made with wheat flour, 3 cookies made with wheat flour, muffins made with wheat flour. So a little bit of foods projects there. We have a wheat photography judging exhibit where they have wheat photos, and then those are scored based on 4-H photography criteria. And then we have wheat educational posters and displays. And then, as I said, the last one is for Clover Buds, and that would be the 5- and 6-year-olds.
So an opportunity to compete as well.
Yes, and that's what it's all about. They bring their exhibits. While they're off on the tours, and there will be 2 tours that I can get to in a little bit, we have them judged and with ribbons and judges' comments, and then later in the afternoon we go over those so they know why their exhibits were what they were.
And that's important, that feedback.
Definitely.
Talk a little bit about the tours then. Where are you going to be going?
Well, we'll start off with a first part of it. Everybody will get this tour, and it will be the Skyland Grain Complex in Cunningham, which is located in Kingman County. And from there, then they will pick one tour or the other. And the first one would be the Canardi Wheat Cleaning or Grain Cleaning Facility, which is in Kingman County, where they do all sorts of seed cleaning and that whole process that they have. It's a private company. Or folks can go to the Heifer Development Yard, and that's part of a dairy, and it's on dairy heifer production, so they get to see how that operation is. So they'll go to the general tour, and then they'll get to pick a specialized tour for the second tour. And then we'll come back in and have lunch. We have also some judging of exhibits, so we generally have a wheat class, a photography class, a breads or a roll class, one of the baked goods classes, and where they have some different experiences judging different things related to wheat. And we go over those, and then, as I said, we have door prizes that we give away. We talk about all the classes so that they understand why they were judged the way they were. We talk about their exhibits. They have questions, and it's sort of a 6-hour day jam-packed full of everything, all things wheat.
Well, and it's nice to focus on just that one area.
Definitely, and we generally have anywhere from 60 to 100 attend, and registration is open now on the Kansas 4-H website, and that would be www.kansas4-h.org, and on that homepage of Kansas 4-H, you can click under What's Hot, and it'll take you to that page so that you can register and learn more details about the Wheat Expo in Kingman on August 8th.
And if you're somebody who is interested in entering one of those first 2 divisions, you want to make note of that deadline.
Yes, they need to be sent off to K-State prior by July 22nd so that they can run them through their testing for all those milling qualities and protein and other factors.
What kind of information do they need to include with the sample? Any, or just send it in?
No, there's actually on the website we have the little information. They have to include the variety of wheat and some other information, and they include that as they send it in so that they can do the proper testing so that the results make sense.
I've got to ask, do we know what to expect this year with the way the wheat crop has been going?
No, I mean, I think we'll be in good shape out here in western Kansas as long as we don't get hailed out. But, there are a lot of fields that are still underwater or were really underwater for a long time. So, from what I've heard, it's going to affect the yields and the quality of the wheat. So, it just depends where you are in Kansas because it is a huge state, and we've all gotten lots of different varying amounts of rain out here or anywhere.
So it might be a good year to enter and find out just exactly how the wheat does shape up.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely, and it's always a good experience to do that. And there is no charge for the testing, so it's a wonderful courtesy that we get from the KSU Wheat Quality Lab in Manhattan.
And also not a very high registration fee.
Nope, we just charge $6, and you get a free lunch and then all the education, and it's a nice little field day all wrapped together, as I said, in 6 hours.
And if people are staying overnight, they might want to look into arrangements as well?
Yes, if they're coming in early from a distance, they would need to make hotel arrangements in Kingman or a surrounding place on their own.
Again, this is coming up on August 8th in Kingman, and all of the information is online.
Yes, it is.
And they could also contact you directly if they needed to.
Most definitely. Waldren at ksu.edu. That's DWALDREN at ksu.edu, or my phone is 303-349-7403.
All right. As always, Deryl, we appreciate the update.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
That's Northwest Area 4-H Specialist Deryl Waldren. Again, for more information about the Kansas 4-H State Wheat Expo being held August 8th at the Kingman Expo Center in Kingman, visit kansas4h.org. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.